Yeah. And I'm sick and tired of listening to people that are insulting our intelligence. I can assure you today that if all the European nations do away with their armies, that's the day we also do away with the Namibian Defense Force. Now, we may argue that, of course, Namibian Defense Force is not strong enough to stand up against armies the type of America and so on. But equally, our country is also not strong enough to compete against economies of America and so on. So to our business people, our companies are also small, also not compete. So do we do away with Namibia as a nation? Or do we do away with our small companies? Why should it be that Namibia should take away the defense force because we cannot fight American arms and so on? Now, in fact, the failed coup in Equatorial Guinea the other time, in 2004, was financed, organized by British financiers. The same thing happens in Chile during the elected period. The coup was financed by ITT. So if private business people are involved in the overthrow of legitimately elected governments, why should we not have our own defense force? In fact, the other day, we were listening to the news, Trump went to Europe. He was telling the Europeans, in fact, more specifically, the Germans to increase their defense budget. Why is it done? So, of course, we may not be able to fight these big countries, but of course, we also not want to be vulnerable to bands of missionaries that will come in to work our governments. So, the other thing is when we look at the primary functions of government. Primary functions of government, the first item that you will see is provide security to its people. The other day, Honorable Benani was speaking about keeping government or reducing their cabinet positions. But he never, defense was not among those that were going to get a cut. Right? He still repeated it, he still maintained in his cabinet once he assumed power. Now, the other thing also that you need to remember is that taxes, historically, taxes used to be collected by soldiers, not by the Ministry of Finance. And the only reason why people today are paying taxes is not because the law says so, it's because it can be forced by soldiers. Now, we may say, no, of course, the police are enough to do that. They can go and collect and enforce the collection of taxes. The only reason why police go and collect taxes is because they have their own reinsurer, which is the Namibian Defense Force. So if you are serious about this debate, we should not even talk about transforming them into a border guard. Why? Because border guarding is already part of their duty. If you're serious about not wanting to waste money on defense, just do away with defense. Don't really get into border guards. And then you can contribute to the economy. This is what we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Malik, great presentation. Mr. Shode, all of the speakers, great presentation. I just wanted to make 3 remarks. One on public sector reform, EPZ, and the export levy. Yeah. Public sector reforms. I listened to what Mr. Klaus Shade said. I just question the wisdom of doing public sector reform now at this stage, when the private sector is already constricted. People are being retrenched, people are on the street. So now, if you now try and reform the public sector, put more people on the street, yeah, that's the recipe for political instability. Really. I will not do that now. I would wait until the economy is stabilized. EPZ. From my sector where I'm coming, mining industry, diamond specifically. In Namibia, we have about 13 diamond cutting and polishing factories. All of them are under the EPZ regime. Now, those people, when they came to Namibia, come and invest in this business, we said, let's create incentives to attract investment. Now you've attracted the people to Namibia under the guise of EPZ. Now you take it away. Now that's like deception. Now you invite people, now when they are in, you pull the carpet from under their feet. I'll tell you, if you scrap EPZ, all those factories will close down. I guarantee you. Yeah. Export levy. I know the intention of export levy was to promote local beneficiation so that we are not an exporter of raw materials, so that we become an industrialized nation. But also, if you look at the mineral sector vis-a-vis the export levy, we are saying less beneficiate. We'll be having this discussion about beneficiation. See, what is it that you can beneficiate? What is the viable and sustainable to beneficiate in Namibia? Copper, for example, somebody just mentioned, we are a user of copper products. But you cannot expect mining industry to beneficiate copper. That's not their core business. They don't know how to do this. You have to invite industry to do this. It's totally separate industry. So we are punishing the wrong sector. So for me, export levy is really a retrogressive tax. You are actually creating a disincentive to attract investment by doing that. And I can tell you, for example, NAMDE is reluctant to invest further in exploration and expansion of mines because of this levy. So now you are constricting the economy further. So what you are doing is really what you call the law of unintended consequences. You want to do good, but you're creating bad in the process. Thank you.
My question starting with the National Youth Council is knowing the structure in which the National Youth Council is organized. It's more kind of a politically organized structure. So I'm thinking of ordinary youth that may not be subscribing to this structure, how it is meant to benefit this youth. And the budget, the vision is to stimulate economic growth and maybe also to stimulate innovation. And then we have decrease in budget allocation in the agricultural sector, the SME, industrialization, and I think there is a mismatch. If we look at the vision, the budget portrays and what it really does on the ground. Anti-Corruption Commission has 60 million, and I wonder what the justification is, and also whether when we talk about the decline in the economic growth and the money that we do not have, do we connect the necessary dots and calculate what corruption really does to our economy, and therefore perhaps strengthen the mandate of the Anti-Corruption Commission? Because for now it's more like a waste, because the ACC remains toothless. If we can look at the framework under which and the mandate that the ACC has currently, I feel so sad when I look at that 60 million. I would rather try and strengthen the mandate of the ACC to be more effective. Thank you.
I feel like youth issues cannot be addressed without looking at the backbone, which in this case I refer to the Constitution. You look at the constitutional provision on affirmative action. It only cater for 3 designated groups. You have women, people with disabilities, and then the third being people previously disadvantaged. This group includes everyone basically. But if you look at the trend of unemployment in our country, the most hit are youth. But then yet, the youth are nowhere catered for or at least acknowledged in this law provision. So if maybe I'm here to lobby on this, I'm here to lobby maybe for support from parliamentarians or and from both private and public sector for maybe inputs on how we can maybe review this law and if possibly also maybe amend it. Because then the second step would be then also you look at, because the youth are disadvantaged in affirmative action, the second again advantage we'll find is that they are also again, when you like the requirement that the Public Service Commission asks for entry level. I feel like can we do away maybe with the entry level requirement for graduates or youth. And then maybe also the collateral issue that we discussed by Mr.
Best outcome in terms of allocation of those resources. And when we were cutting, we looked at where do we have perhaps excess allocations, where if they were allocated to a different place or a different implementer, we might get a different result. So in terms of, for instance, and it will lead me into my response to my young colleague there. We had an allocation under agriculture to AMTA Agribusiness in terms of transfers. We've got about 300 million in the development budget that is aimed at the horticultural sector for 2019-20. So if you look at who would be a better implementer of the 300, we arrived at the answer that we would leave the 300 at the Ministry of Agriculture, but we felt that if we allocated a fraction of that amount to a better implementing agent that would get a better result, that might even exceed the allocation that would be made if we made it specifically to a ministry versus an implementing agent that had better abilities to be able to implement. So really the conversations around allocations have been very, very robust. And none of the allocations were done lightly. And when you're cutting from one area and allocating to another, you are aware of what those maybe unintended consequences would be, but there is only so much that we have to allocate. And I know there is now a call from the private sector to say, please, if you continue to cut, the economy will continue to shrink. Unfortunately, if we spend money that we do not have today, the conversations that we're having about the youth, we are taking their future away. And we cannot, as a state, continue to do that. If we think of the position where we've come from in terms of just the fiscal cliff that we were headed to in 2015, 2016, when we decided to take the path of fiscal consolidation, it was not a path that we could have continued on, because you continue down that path and you take away your freedom in terms of fiscal, and you would have to hand it over to somebody else to manage it for you, and this would have been the institutions that we are all aware of, being the IMF, World Bank, would they now come and fund you because you yourself cannot fund yourself and you cannot manage your own finances. So it's hard choices that had to be made, and although it is painful, we're hoping that it puts us as a state on a stronger footing. So during those boom years that we saw, the effect on our import bill was so severe that in terms of the funding that we then obtained as a state, a significant part of that funding went to building up the national reserves that are denominated in foreign currency to ensure that when you present the state, or when you present your commercial bank with an invoice to pay for something that you've imported, there is currency to be able to make that payment. So during those boom years, we created habits that resulted in us in having to shore up our import reserves. It takes money to build reserves. And therefore, in terms of the allocations, we're now in a position where we are saying, okay, if that is where the consequences of the boom is, how do we ensure that we do things differently and allocate different activities to secure the future of our youth? So that's one. To the specific question that was raised around technology, it's unfortunate that by the time the budget is being tabled, the work that we are doing, and I'm hoping it works out feeling a little bit better, we have undertaken work to try and see how we can come up with a government innovation accelerator hub. This is essentially looking at how do we ensure, and there are some legal ramifications, not legal ramifications, but there's legal frameworks that we need to work through to ensure that if it is something that we propose and we start, we don't have our youth with technology solutions coming into the hub, providing solutions to the states that are technology enabled and not being able for us to procure those services. So it is something that is still very much in research stage, but the aim is to say that there are a lot of government challenges that require a technology solution. But at the moment, the way that we are procuring in terms of our Procurement Act, because we do not have unsolicited bid, it means that even you as any business person, if you've got a technology solution, you can't come to the state and say, I want to deploy my technology solution, because you cannot come to us as an unsolicited bidder. We are the ones at the moment that would have to go to you and say, we want your service. But what does that do? It then means that you are tendering out your innovation. So if we come up with a different structure that enables for the state and SOEs to say, these are the problems and challenges that I have within a safe space, develop a solution for me, and I source from that platform. And you are guaranteed that the sourcing is going to come from that platform. Your solution matches what our challenges are, and you don't have to have your solutions being tendered out. So there is still work in progress, but hopefully it's going to unlock a lot of doors for our innovators. It's going to unlock a lot of doors for our startups. It's going to unlock a lot of doors for those of our youth and our entrepreneurs that have got technology solutions and they can deploy their technology, which is currently not provided for. So that's one. He's worked out now, but I'm hoping somebody can give me his number. He can maybe help us in terms of finalizing the work that we're doing on the Innovation Hub. The other questions that have been raised or comments that have been made, defense, I'll try and not get into that. I think the executive director has expressed himself. Again, it was a very difficult conversation because unfortunately, when the parliamentarians go into the detailed debate on the budget, we will see the allocation of the 6.8 in terms of where it was allocated to, because a large chunk of that. Let me just get my figures right. Defense. 5.8, 5.9 billion. A large chunk of that goes to the payroll expenditure. And unfortunately, it's a very rigid expenditure to try and manage. To such an extent that when we were finalizing the allocations to defense, when they sent us their financing proposal, they had one line item under goods and other services, which means that we've got a huge allocation to payroll, but we do not have an allocation to goods and other services, which is where we've got utilities, we've got food, we've got the uniforms, and the like. So I think it will be an interesting conversation in Parliament, but I will leave that up to the parliamentarians. As to whether we need an army, I think also that's a conversation that is not a Ministry of Finance conversation. That will leave up to the members of Parliament and the head of states. There was a comment that was made around triple P that again it will be subjected to the Central Procurement Board. If we just familiarize ourselves with the triple P Act, it does not go through the Central Procurement Board, which is why I'm saying as private sector, please familiarize yourself with the Act because it unlocks a lot of opportunities for private sector certainly. So it's very different from our Public Procurement Act, and that's why we've got two different acts. So it doesn't go through the Central Procurement Board. In terms of the land conference resolutions, I see it was also ticked that it was not done. It's unclear. In terms of the land conference resolution, there is a specific allocation of about 300 million in the current budget, of which 200 is sitting under the development budget, and 100 million is an increase in land servicing allocations. And just on that specifically, there has been a significant allocation of funds that have been made over the past 2 years and continuing over the MTEF in terms of land servicing. This current budget, there was 692 million that was allocated for land servicing under the Ministry of Urban. There is another 862, if I'm not mistaken, during the current year in terms of land servicing, growing to 1 billion in 2020-2021. So the funds in terms of allocations are there. It's how do we execute on the amounts that have been allocated as budget holders at the different ministries. And I think that's a more important conversation for us to have. So if we have money that is being allocated, are we spending it at the right rate? Are we spending it timely, or are we getting to the end of the year and we have not spent it? And if we're getting to the end of the year, say or mid-year, by August, and you have not spent on your development budget, naturally, we would, in terms of the revisions, we would reallocate it to other sectors that would require that money. But what you're doing is you then disadvantaging the economy because you're not spending it in a place that enables us to generate and ignite growth. So I think the direction should be, how do we spend the money that has been allocated? Because it's a significant amount. It's not small change. So if we've allocated 862 million to just land servicing, how are we spending that? Are we spending it timely? Is it getting to the regional councils on time? Is it getting to the local authorities on time? And I think those are the questions that we need to be asking. In terms of the one of the other ones is also ITAS. ITAS has been rolled out, so I'm encouraging everybody here, and everybody looks like they are of employment age and look like we're employed. To please sign up and become an e-filer. ITAS has been rolled up. It is, and if you've got questions around how do you enroll, how do you register, they've got a help desk. And I think probably the challenges would be how responsive the help desk is with everybody having to register at the same time. But it has been rolled out. With regards to there was a comment on the National Youth Council. Saying that it's a political institution. I think it's important that we make reference to the Act 3 of 2009, which is the National Council Act. That National Council Act talks about the formulation, the establishment of the National Youth Council and the National Youth Development Fund in the preamble of the Act. And that act, if you read it quite clearly, perhaps maybe how it was constituted, in terms of the institution itself, it's not a political institution. So there is an actual act that governs the National Youth Council with the objectives of what it is aiming to do as a council. But that act establishes the National Youth Council as well as the National Youth Development Fund. Now, if we do not make allocations to the National Youth Development Fund, then it will make it difficult for them to be able to carry out their activities and the fact that it is targeted specifically for youth. So I think it's just us familiarizing ourselves with an act. It's Act 3 of 2009, which establishes as a juristic person. So it's not meant to be political at all. And then in terms of the comment on the elections, it was an interesting debate, because what you try and do over the MTEF, so we've got a 3-year rolling budget, is to make sure that you don't have significant increases and significant decreases. And it was just one of those things where we said to make sure that we've got that 220 continuing in the MTEF, that we had it allocated to ECN. There are local authority elections in the following year, but not to the same quantum as the general elections this year. And then obviously when we get to specific allocations in 2020, 2021, it will then get allocated out to other needs, and certainly it will probably end up in the social sector as an allocation. I'd like to thank the other speakers in terms of the contributions that have been made. I've made quite a number of notes around the SEMA's flat rate, in terms of what we are doing with regards to the tax reforms and tax proposals, the interest that we're paying and the currency depreciation. It's quite interesting that being pegged to the rand, which has depreciated 85% in the past 10 years, that we've got the unintended consequences, but I mean, that is a regime that we are in, and in the end it is favorable, because if you look at the SACU allocations to Namibia, which are actually quite significant. And maybe at this point to talk about SACU. SACU is not like a charity allocation to Namibia. The SACU revenue that gets allocated to Namibia is because we've got one common border in terms of imports as SACU member states. You've got one country that then collects those customs and excise duties. And if they get collected by Namibia, we then make our contribution to the pool. If they get collected by South Africa as they come into the border, they then get allocated in their proportionate share to the respective countries within SACU. So it is, if we were managing, if we had our own, if we were not part of the customs union, those receipts would be Namibian direct receipts. So I've seen comments yesterday to say that there's a huge dependency on SACU. It is our revenue. It is not something that we are going to have to pay from other countries to get. Okay, I spoke about technology. I don't know if I've left anybody out in terms of the interventions. So I think for the youth, there is the Government Innovation Accelerator Hub that we are doing research on, and I think that will probably answer the bulk of the youth questions.
Mr. Amotenya, public sector reform is a longer term project. It doesn't mean that tomorrow you receive your letter, you can leave end of April or so. It's a multi-year process, but I think there is need also after some time, as companies do as well, to review whether the structure still serves the purpose or whether it can be done differently. In particular, because of technological progress, we can use technology, I think, in government. And I think ITAS is a very good example. And I was very pleased by the responses from the help desk. They came immediately back to me. So congratulations to that one. But again, technology, I read sometime in the paper that even Parliament is going towards paperless sessions also. I think in the budget we allocate 113 million to printing and advertising. You can reduce printing costs substantially by moving towards more paperless offices. It's not needed to print each and every draft and email. I just attended a conference in Nairobi last week. It was a paperless conference. You scan with the QRs, you scan the presentations with your cell phone, you have it immediately on your cell phone. No need for printing and carrying 5 kilograms of paper back home. So no, but really, technologies will have an impact on the operations of our government as well. On export taxes, I believe that this should be possible to process granite, marble further in the country instead of exporting raw blocks to other countries in the world. What mechanisms we use, one can discuss, but there is certainly room for more processing done in Namibia.
Anything? Anything? 15 Namibian, oh yeah! 15 Namibian dollar. Is that a new thing? Added to. But it was already, it was just added to. I think you must read the statement. There were 2 new things. The new curriculum and the new high-level panel on economic advice or something. Those are the only 2 new things that came to my mind when I checked the paper. Go and read. Now, why am I saying this? I am saying this because, in as much as we are consolidating, Mr. Ndorokade, we are dealing with people's lives here. Let us not hide behind these technical numbers and jargons of things.